Hello everybody and welcome back to another video. Today I will be giving my picks for week 3 of the 2023 season of the Overwatch League. If you missed it on Monday, check the link in the description, or check the description. You can find the code for my own personal Pick'em's leaderboard if you would like to join. Like I said, in the description you'll find that. Shout out to Beskar Gam, currently leading that group, just 2 points ahead of me, but currently leading there. So that's all I got to say before we jump into the games. Lots of good ones to go over this week. So let's get started. First game of the weekend is the Hangzhou Spark taking on the Seoul Dynasty, the final weekend of APAC matches before we get into the knockouts where the contender teams are playing. Hangzhou Spark, despite the fact that they lost to the Guangzhou Charge, it was not a terrible match from them. Obviously, they were certainly not the better team went up against the Guangzhou Charge, but they had a decent performance. Seoul Dynasty coming off a very, very poor performance in their matchup against the Shanghai Dragons. They just did not look very good. I certainly feel worse about this Dynasty roster than I did just a week ago, so to me, this is a pretty one-sided affair. I think it should be pretty clear that the Hangzhou Spark are favored to take this matchup. Tank-wise, I think they're just in a better spot. I think that they really are firing on all cylinders. I feel way more kind of confident in their supports and their damage duo and even in their tanks, like I said. And so, to me, this is a win for the Hangzhou Spark, 3-1. I'll give the Dynasty a map because I don't think the Spark have looked... they lost a map to the Fuel, which was a little disappointing, but I think that they're still a better team, so they should take this one with relative ease. Moving on to the next match, we have the Shanghai Dragons taking on the Dallas Fuel. An interesting match. Shanghai, the team that we all assumed was the worst team in the region, is coming off of a win over the Seoul Dynasty, while the Dallas Fuel, a team that will be very, very good, is, not. And they have not won a single match yet this stage or this season. And to be fair, they also have one map win under their belt. This is kind of an interesting match and a really kind of big one, where I think this is really kind of the breaking point for the Dallas Fuel. If they want to win going into the spring stage knockouts, which they technically don't need to win, they will be guaranteed to be in the spring stage knockouts, but a win would obviously put them in a somewhat better position. You have a little more confidence. You certainly don't want to go into the spring stage knockouts as the defending Overwatch League champions with no wins, being in a pretty bad situation if you're kind of that team. So I think, relatively speaking, this is a big game for the Fuel. If they win this game, they kind of put themselves at least in a somewhat decent spot. Whereas the Dragons team, we didn't have a ton of faith in. Fleta looked pretty good in the game. It was kind of the thing that was really the big spot of concern for this team. And Viper and Hisu had a very, very, very good week. So it's going to come down to kind of the matchups there, kind of how they do. But to me, this is the weekend that if the Dallas Fuel are not as bad as what a lot of people think they are, this is where they need to be able to find their wins. If they are going to win, obviously these are the last 2 games of the stage, but if they can't beat Shanghai and Seoul, this team is in a very, very bad spot. I think they should still be the better team than both Shanghai and potentially the Seoul Dynasty. But I think definitely, even though Shanghai did beat the Dynasty, I still feel like the Fuel should be favored to take this match. But Shanghai looked good enough that I think this will be a relatively close match. I'm going to say a 3-2 game in favor of the Dallas Fuel. I'm hoping this is the weekend they finally show up and they finally look pretty good, but it's all going to come down to what they do in this here game. And so I think you have to be very cautious about what this team has done so far, but all in all, I do think this is the time they finally net their first win of the season. Up next, we have one of the worst looking games on the schedule in terms of just performances from these teams so far this season. It is the London Spitfire versus the Las Vegas Eternal. Now, neither of these teams played last week, so they only have 1 week's worth of games. Vegas 0-6 in maps. London, I believe, 1-6 in maps. So, pretty rough first weekend for both of these teams. Actually, I think London has won 2 maps. I think they're 2-6 in maps. So, relatively speaking, neither of these teams are in a very good spot. But I do feel like London overall has shown more. Obviously, they made the top 8 in the Pro-Am. Their group was not the toughest. They had the Vegas Eternal, they had the LA Valiant, they had Saints. Like they were better than the teams in that group, and they were definitely pushed a bit. But I think that you just kind of have to look at this Spitfire team, and despite the fact that they started off quite weak in the first week of the season, the Vegas Eternal also don't look good. And I think right now you have to favor the Spitfire. They've done more. I feel better about their coaching. I feel better about their overall roster strength. Vegas has shown me literally nothing to think that they have done nearly enough to be a very competitive team in the region. Even though London is struggling, I don't think they should fall to the Vegas Eternal. But because I don't think either of these teams are particularly exceptional or particularly great, I will say it's a 3-1 for London instead of any other score. I think it's possible that Vegas are able to take a map. They took a map off them in the Pro-Am last time they played, so I'll give them the benefit of the doubt they can take a map off of London, but I think London has this series overall based on what I've seen so far. Up next, we have the Florida Mayhem taking on the Los Angeles Valiant. I think Mayhem, clearly the better team here. I think the Mayhem have, despite their loss to the LA Gladiators last week, they're still a really, really good team, and I think that they should be favored pretty heavily to take down a relatively weak Valiant roster. Who did get their first map win of the season against New York last weekend, but even New York is a team that most people don't rate super, super highly, and that series was not particularly close outside of the first map that the Valiant were able to take away. I think the Valiant won't really be all that great in this matchup. I think the Mayhem are just way too good, way too strong. I think they take this one by a score of 3-0. I am sorry, Valiant fans. I am sorry, Tezonde. Right now, I think the Mayhem just look to be that much stronger. Moving on now, we have the first big pick game of the weekend, and it is arguably the most anticipated matchup for the weekend, which is the Atlanta Reign taking on the Houston Outlaws. These two teams are both undefeated. Atlanta sitting at 4-0, and the Outlaws sitting at 2-0. They did not play last week. Neither team has lost a map yet this season. They have won all of their games 3-0, a combined 18 map wins and 0 map losses and 0 draws between these two teams. It's tough to kind of pick this matchup because we didn't see Houston last week. Houston looks very, very good. I think their win against London was really, really, or not London, the LA Gladiators. My apologies. That was kind of the game that really put them on the right track, where you looked at that game and you saw what Houston was able to do, and it wasn't particularly close, right? Even though the Gladiators are a good team, we've seen them beat the likes of Florida, we've seen them beat some other pretty kind of top-level teams. Like Houston dismantled the Gladiators and also very much dismantled the LA Valiant. Now, two very different teams. We feel very differently about those two teams. But Houston played very well, and Houston especially is doing really, really well on the backs of Fearless as Winston and on the back of the support duo of Violet and Shu. I do have some concerns about Houston, and I do think there's obviously some level of bias right now because we did see Atlanta play this past weekend, and we saw them dominate once again against some pretty, like some more stalwart competition than what we've seen from them in kind of some of the past weeks. They beat the Vancouver Titans 3-0. Cool, that's expected. They also beat the Gladiators 3-0, right? So there is a common opponent between both of these teams, which is the LA Gladiators. I think one of the biggest concerns, and something that's been brought up by other people in the community, but I think it is reason to kind of be a little concerned, right? We're seeing a bit of a meta shift away from Winston, right? In the first weekend of matches, the Reign played, they played more Donghak, not necessarily full time. We still saw some Hawk, but Donghak was getting some play because he was kind of coming in on the Winston, but this past weekend, I'm pretty sure Hawk played all 6 maps. They were playing a lot of Ramatra. They were playing Diva. They moved quite heavily away from Winston-based comps, and a lot of the region seemingly wants to move away from Winston in the West. Lots of Ramatra, some Diva, some Sigma occasionally. There are definitely some maps where you do see more Winston, but it looks like the region is moving a bit away from Winston. So if that's the case, Houston is going to most likely either have Fearless in on one of his non-comfort heroes, like something like Ramatra, or we'll see Gargoyle. And if that's the case, I think you have to favor the Atlanta Reign. I think Hawk is a better off tank than we've seen from Gargoyle. I think that it is certainly the type of series that I think it should be competitive. I think it should be very, very close. But I think that there is a reason to believe that the Atlanta Reign could just completely stomp the Outlaws. I will throw out there that I think it is more likely that the Atlanta Reign win 3-0 than it is the Houston Outlaws win 3-0. I think if the Outlaws win this game, it will be 5 maps, it will be a brawl, it will be close, it will be kind of forcing Winston on maps where maybe it's not the most ideal pick, but just Fearless as a player is able to kind of bring them over the edge. I think Violet Shu are kind of the deal breaker here. I think they're huge parts of this team's success. And we've seen the Atlanta Reign do very, very well at punishing backlines and dealing with support. So I think this is kind of an interesting game. It's going to be a very big clash of styles. And we haven't seen Houston in a week. We didn't see them last week, so maybe they've been grinding and cooking some stuff up. So it is tough to predict because we don't really have anything to go off of based off of last week with Houston. But I'm going to say that I think right now the Atlanta Reign look like the best team in the league. I think they should be favored to win this game. And I think that they have more flexibility. They're a little bit more meta resistant than Houston Outlaws are. So I'm going to say it's a 3-2. I think it's a very, very good match, a very close series. But I think the Atlanta Reign will take it in a more competitive series. We've been saying that for a while. We thought that the Joe down last week would be super competitive. It really wasn't. We thought Houston versus LA Gladiators in the first week would be super competitive. It kind of wasn't. So my hope is it's a banger of a series, but we will see with time. Moving on now to the next big pick game. We have the Seoul Dynasty versus the Dallas Fuel. Now, I don't necessarily think this is the most competitive match or the best match in the APAC region this weekend. We'll get to that one later. I think this is the toughest one to predict because what we have here are essentially the two teams that a lot of people would put either as the bottom 2 or 2 of the bottom 3 teams in the APAC region. Dallas has not gotten their footing yet. They have not looked very good. They've struggled to kind of figure out their identity, figure out what they want to be, who they want to be, how they want to do things. And they just have not looked very comfortable in the meta. Bliss and MCD have not been nearly as kind of dynamic as Chiu and Fielder, which is kind of expected. Hondan has looked kind of uncomfortable on some of the tank picks, even though I do think he has generally looked pretty good when he got off of Winston last week. So, to me, this is the type of game where you have a Dynasty team that is coming off of a loss to the Dragons that we just thought the Dragons were kind of washed, and they were boomed, and they didn't look very good. And they had a very close win against the Seoul Infernal that maybe they arguably shouldn't have won. Maybe Infernal kind of did a little bit of trolling, did a little bit of throwing, and lost that match. So this is a big pick where I really don't know how it's going to go. I believe that this is the week for the Dallas Fuel to finally click, and things will finally look better for this team. I think the level of competition this week is very different from the past couple of weeks, where there was a lot of Winston being forced, and they just were not comfortable in Winston. Piggy looked better, and then they had to play the 2 best Winstons in the region. I think that was their biggest issue. To me, this is really where Dallas' strengths should come out, because I think that Hanbin's going to be able to force way more tempo and way more of his own style on the opposition this week. I think he'll be able to do it with Fleta. I think he'll be able to do it, whether it be Void or more likely Bellisria for the Seoul Dynasty. I think Seoul really is going to kind of have to bank on the DPS duo, the Profit duo, to kind of step up. Edison has struggled a bit this season. I don't think he's been playing to the level and the dynamic hit scan level we kind of saw from him in the playoffs last year especially, but also like at stretches during the year as well. So I think it's an interesting match. I think it's very tough. It's two teams that are kind of on the down, and this is like you need to see. This could potentially be to determine which of these teams ends up with 2 wins, which one ends up with 1 win, depending on what happens on Friday. So it's interesting. It's an interesting matchup. I think it's one of the ones I'm most intrigued by, and that's why I have it as a big pick. Like I said, I don't particularly think it's going to be the best game of the weekend, but I think it's interesting. I think it's going to be pretty close. But I'm going to go in favor of the Dallas Fuel by a score of 3-2. I do think this is, like I said, the Dallas week. They bounce back and they'll look a lot better. I think they need to. If they don't, it's bad. And I think that they understand that. I think the expectations around the Seoul Dynasty are much different. I think there's a lot more concern. I think there's a lot more questions about like that roster in general. Whereas Dallas Fuel, like, you are defending champions. Like, you have to turn the ship around, and you have to turn around soon. You have to have something, some level of momentum going into the knockouts. So I think it's a huge game for them. I think it's way more important for them. I think they will fully bounce back here going into this one. Up next, we have the Guangzhou Charge taking on the Seoul Infernal. This, I think, will be a phenomenal game. These are two of the top 3 teams in the region right now. Infernal have a bit of a tough weekend this weekend, and they started off by playing against the currently undefeated in maps and games Guangzhou Charge. Charge look really, really good. Jimmy popping off. Jimmy's that man. He's himmy. This is a huge game for them, and I think it's going to come down to what Seoul Infernal are able to do. I think last week was a huge week for the Infernal. I think they were arguably one of the 2 or 3 best teams in terms of just their performance last weekend, in terms of like changing my view on the team. Like, I thought they had a great weekend last weekend. I thought New York had a great weekend last weekend. Obviously, Guangzhou Charge, great weekend last weekend. But Seoul Infernal look very, very good. They understand what they're doing. MN3's Zats are popping off. Skew's popping off. Mag is able to play Winston. He's comfortable. He's able to do kind of his thing. So this is a really big match, I think, for the Infernal. To me, Charge are just dynamic across the board in a way that the Infernal could be at times, but don't fully get to. Like, Choice One and Jimmy right now are dominating. Piggy is dominating. And I think the big difference maker is just, like, you have 2 supports on the Guangzhou Charge who are both making plays with Farway and Lazernius. They are just they're super in tune with kind of what the team is, who they are, what their identity is. I like Fixa and Skewed. Skewed, like I said, had a great weekend. I don't think they are necessarily the greatest in the league. And just the fact that the Charge they won 3-0 against Dallas. They won 3-0 against the Spark. They won 3-0 against the Dynasty. They are 3-0ing everybody. So I feel like this is another... if the Charge are going to do it, they're going to do it in this game as well. I think this is another 3-0 in favor of the Charge. I think it's a good game. Kind of close, but one-sided in the same way that the Charge over Spark was. But I think they're the better team. I think they'll take this one 3-0, just because they've done it so far all season. Up next is the San Francisco Shock taking on the Washington Justice. It'll be our first time seeing the Shock in a couple of weeks. We didn't see them last week, so big game for them. They need to step up. They did not look great last time we saw them. Barely beat the Toronto Defiant. Got completely steamrolled by the Atlanta Reign, which is the game that most of us really thought would be close. And so the Shock are in need of kind of doing some things. I know there's some issues with the team in terms of like training facilities and housing and all that type of stuff. And I totally understand that is a very valid thing to kind of cause problems for your team. But they've also just kind of lost. I need to see them do something. I need to see them kind of put themselves in a more understandable and like solid spot, because I think they've been kind of all over the place in terms of what they want to run, who they want to play, and like I do think I need to see a little bit more out of them. But I think the Justice, as good as they've looked against some of the opposition they've had, it's really just like the Alpha Eve show with Flora popping off as well. I think Shock should be able to win this game. I think they're the better team right now. They barely beat the Defiant, and I think the Defiant are in that similar tier to the Justice. But I think the time off should be good for the Shock. Usually they come back from breaks pretty well, and they look a lot better. So I think the time off will be good for the Shock, and I think they're going to take this one by a score of 3-1. Hopefully being the thing for the team to help right them in the right direction. Or if you don't like this team, maybe you want them to still look like a miss. I don't know. It's up to you, I guess. Who cares? Anyway, next match is the New York Excelsior taking on the Vegas Eternal. New York got their first win of the season last week against the LA Valiant. Right now, I think the Valiant are better than the Eternal, so by that logic, it seems pretty likely that the Excelsior take this win over the Vegas Eternal. I think New York just has more talent across the board. I would argue there is not a single spot on the Vegas Eternal that they are more talented than New York. Fitz, yeah, he's better than Dove. Psycho's better than Malthal. Kellen is better than Vulcan, former teammates. And then the support line for New York is better. As much as I think Luke Camino Raktek is the best part of that Vegas Eternal roster, New York, I think Creative and Lep are just so dynamic when we've seen them play. So, I mean, to me, it's not a surprise. I think New York takes this one. I think they take this one 3-0. I think they're the better team. They should win this one, no problem. Unfortunately, I think the Vegas Infernal just do not have that bone in their body right now to dethrone a New York team that is ascending as we have seen them do last week. Up next is the Atlanta Reign taking on the Los Angeles Valiant. Once again, very good team in the Atlanta Reign, not very good team in the LA Valiant. Valiant have had a map where they looked very, very good and kind of competitive with New York. Outside of that, they just have not looked very good. They look pretty outclassed, pretty outmatched. They're not beating the Atlanta Reign, right? This is like arguably best team versus worst team in the region, arguably in the league. Yeah, give me Atlanta Reign, take this one 3-0. I'm sorry, once again, Tay Zonde and Valiant fans, but I think we all agree this one's going to the Atlanta Reign. Next is the Hangzhou Spark taking on the Seoul Infernal. Another really interesting match. Two good teams in this region, arguably the second and third best team in the region. I want to see what the Infernal are made of. This is kind of, to me, the game where they really will show what they're kind of made of. I think the strengths for both of these teams are very similar. They're both very good on the Winston. They both have a very dynamic damage duo that can do a lot of work. And they have a support line with kind of a dynamic player and a very solid main support as well. These two teams are basically mirror images of each other in terms of like what they like. Obviously, Spark do have 20, so they do have extra kind of tank flexibility. But generally speaking, these two teams kind of do similar things and are very, very similar in terms of what they are, in theory, good at. And I think that will be kind of the story of this match. This could be a fantastic Winston duel between the best two Winstons in the region. I think that's the most exciting thing about this. Plus, I think you have two phenomenal damage duos with Shy and Leave and Emmett and Zest. So I think it'll be close just because I want it to be close. This was the other game that I considered making the big pick from the APAC region because I think it is just a phenomenal game. Matchup between two teams very close together, very similar. I think it'll be a clash of kind of similar strengths and weaknesses. But I think that the better roster as a whole is the Hangzhou Spark, and they've looked more promising, despite the fact that they are coming off a loss. I think they look still very good, and so I'm going to take the Spark to take this one by a score of 3-2. Close, competitive, fun series. It could be a 3-0 where it's basically just the Spark are just that much better. You know, they're 10-15% better than the Seoul Infernal every map. And so even though it's a good fight from the Infernal, they just aren't able to get that extra 10-15% that they need. But I think that it will go the way of the Spark in a relatively close series. But like I said, score could be a whole bunch of different possibilities. Final APAC match of the cycle, I guess, technically, before we move into those knockouts, is the Shanghai Dragons versus the Guangzhou Charge. Charge looks so good right now, they should be able to win this game pretty easily. If they're able to 3-0 the Seoul Infernal, they're going to have no issue 3-0ing the Shanghai Dragons, so I'm going to give the Charge a 3-0 here. I just don't see it being a matchup that favors the Dragons. I think on every roll, Charge look better, and I just think that the Charge should run away with this one with relative ease. Moving back over to the Western region to close out the week, we have the Florida Mayhem taking on the London Spitfire. Match that we saw in the Pro-Am, and it was super one-sided. The Mayhem completely and utterly dominated and destroyed the Spitfire, and I expect much of the same this week. Like I said with the first match of the weekend in this region, we have not seen Spitfire in a bit, so they might look better as we go into this specific weekend. And we'll see what happens, but I still feel as though the Mayhem are in a better spot and should take this one 3-0. I just don't really see the Spitfire being able to topple a Goliath such as the Florida Mayhem. Next is the Houston Outlaws taking on the Washington Justice. Washington's a pretty good team. Houston's a really good team. I think Houston, after their loss to Atlanta, is going to bounce back. Revenge game. Similar in a lot of ways that we saw from Florida last week where they lost to the Gladiators. It was a close series. They made some mistakes down the stretch. Kind of feels bad. They came out in the next game, and it was not close. You know, like they just looked way better, way more kind of on top of things, way stronger, way more kind of in tune with what they needed to do. and they fixed things, and they kind of got everything together. I think it'll be the same type of thing here. I think Houston will take this one with ease, 3-0. Justice, they just don't have it. They just are not the team that you want to try to dethrone a team as good as the Houston Outlaws. Final match of the weekend is the New York Excelsior taking on the San Francisco Shock. Maybe it's a little bit of copium, but I think this match will be pretty close. It could be one-sided. I think that Shock are certainly the favorites, and I think they're going to win this game. I'll be outright and say that. I do think they will win this game. However, I think that they looked pretty disjointed, and they make weird decisions when we saw them last. And I think that is a concern to me, that if you're not able to kind of play to your strengths and kind of make those key moments and take those key fights, you could be in a bad position, right? And I just kind of think about the fact that, like, the Shock really were very, very, very close losing that series against the Defiant, who almost lost to New York as well. Two teams that were just not playing good Overwatch. I don't think San Francisco can show up and, like, not play, good to great Overwatch and just roll over New York. I think that New York will challenge this team if the Shock are not playing well or competing in the level that you kind of hope from them. So I'm going to huff mega copium and hopium with New York here. Like I said, I don't think New York's going to win. I think Shock's going to win this one. But I'm saying a 3-2. I have not seen enough from the Shock based on their match against the Defiant and their match against the Atlanta Reign to think that they can, with ease, put away this New York roster right now. If they roll over Justice, if Justice get just completely destroyed by the San Francisco Shock, put this down as a 3-0 for the Shock over the Excelsior. Right now, I genuinely don't know what type of Shock we're going to get, what we're going to see. I think they have the talent edge. I think they have the coaching edge to beat out a New York team, and they should be expected to win. But I don't feel great about the Shock right now, and so I think it'll be potentially a deceptively close series. So, real quick, throw my picks up on the screen for the whole week so you can see them. As I say, as always, if you agree, disagree, whatever it may be with my picks, let me know your takes in the comments down below. I would love to hear from you, hear your thoughts, hear kind of how you feel about this weekend's matches. And if you enjoyed this video and want more like it in the future, consider liking and subscribing for more content like this in the future. That's going to be all for me for today. Hope you all enjoyed. I hope you are all staying safe and staying healthy. And until next time, bye-bye.